Let's kick off with the questions. We've got in the front row here, Paul, if you could take us to your feet and fire away.
No worries. Thank you. You've both spoken about affordability. My questions are basically twofold, and it's about housing affordability. I've got two daughters who are just about to get into that market. One's just about to leave grade 12, one's in university. So this is a real concern. So, as I said, two-part question. So what is the government doing or going to do in the future to make it more effective? Because it's not effective at the moment. And one of the big parts around it is for foreign ownership. What is the government going to do about foreign ownership? We all know that foreign investment into the country, especially in the housing market, is actually driving the prices up, which is making it unaffordable. If we lived in Thailand, Indonesia, China, Fiji, as a non-citizen, we wouldn't be able to buy property there.
OK, I think we've got the drift. We'll go with the PM first. Thanks, PM.
Thank you. Well, look, thank you very much for the question. You're right. It's always hard to buy a house, and it's particularly hard now, and it's got harder. It's a tough economy when you're trying to get out there and buy a house. I remember when Jenny and I bought our first house, it was 30 years ago. It was tough then, but I believe it's tougher now. Here in Brisbane, you're looking at median house prices of about $840,000. Now, for apartments, it's around $450,000, the median. And one of the things that we've done at the last election, I wanted to see more Australians get in and buy their own home. And so we introduced a range of programs. The Home Guarantee Scheme, the Home Builder Program, which gave people grants to support to build in their own home. And there was also the National Housing Finance and Investment Corporation that was loaning to community housing organisations so they could build more affordable dwelling units. We've got 300,000 Australians into their own home by ensuring they didn't have to have a 20% deposit, they had to save for a 5% deposit. And for single mums, Nicole, who I met in Western Australia just the other day, she's bought her first house because she only had to have a 2% deposit. Now, that saved her years and years and years. House prices are going up, but one of the things we've been able to do is make it that bit easier by ensuring that the government was underwriting the balance of the deposit so they could get access to those loans and they could get into their first home, which meant they got onto the ladder. 160,000 Australians got into their own home for the first time just last year. That's about 70% up on where it had been previously from the past decade. So those programs are working and we're expanding them.
OK, thanks, PM. Opposition Leader.
Well, thanks very much for your question, and it's a common story you hear all around Australia. People are worried about whether their kids will ever get into that great Australian dream that I was raised with of owning your own home. It was something that we took for granted, perhaps. I grew up in public housing, where my mum lived in the same one house for all of her 65 years. But she drummed into me, when you get the opportunity, save for a deposit, buy your own home. But I know that it's just so tough now. So we need to do measures, including some of the measures that the government have done are terrific, but we are missing out on bits too. We're not doing anything in terms of social ownership, which would increase the supply. We have a plan for a Housing Australia Future Fund that would have 20,000 additional public housing units, as well as 10,000 affordable housing units for essential workers. One of the problems we've got is that some of emergency service workers in my electorate and in parts of Brisbane find it difficult to be able to afford to live close to work, and we need to address that as well. We also need to address the rental crisis, because too many people now, rents are going up through the roof as well, and they're doing it really tough. And Scott said that if you're having difficulty with rents, you can just go buy a house. The truth is that it's much more difficult than that, and we need to address each of the issues. How do we get people into home ownership? How do we increase social housing? How do we address affordable housing for essential workers?
Well, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, Anthony made a couple of points there, and he made a comment about what I was saying. We provide, through Commonwealth Rental Assistance, some $5.1 billion a year, and it supports 1.4 million people on their rents every single year. So you might be on income support, but you also get rental assistance on top of that. But one of the important things we did through the National Housing Finance and Investment Corporation, we've already had 15,000 affordable housing units and dwellings built. with community housing organisations. Borrowing money at very low rates as a government. I did this with all the premiers and the chief ministers so we could loan into those community housing organisations that are so well placed to help people get into affordable house.
Did you have
now, we've increased that by $2 billion. No, I'm happy to come to that
as well.
But I'll just say $2 billion we've put more into that fund to ensure that in total we would have done just under 30,000. Now, on foreign ownership, a very good point. On foreign ownership, not only have we toughened the laws on foreign ownership in this country for residential real estate, but more importantly, I increased the resources for the Australian Taxation Office to make sure they're being complied with. And so we've forced divestments of homes that have been bought not in accordance with our laws. It's one thing to have laws, but unless you actually invest in the enforcement of those laws, which we have done by increasing the resources to the Australian Taxation Office to chase down those who've gone and bought those houses when they shouldn't have been able to, well, your laws won't be effective.
PM, I think we're going to have to move on.
Sure.